The pizza box exploded against my chest, sending pepperoni and sauce cascading down my DoorDash uniform, while 4 teenagers filmed it with their phones, laughing like hyenas at a fresh kill. "Oops," sneered the kid in the designer hoodie, his voice dripping with manufactured innocence. "Looks like Grandpa's having a senior moment." I stood there on the pristine doorstep of this McMansion in Highland Park, watching marinara sauce stain the uniform I'd ironed that morning, while these spoiled brats turned my humiliation into content for their social media feeds. At 86, I'd delivered food for 3 years now, ever since my prescription costs had outpaced my fixed income, and I'd learned to swallow pride like bitter medicine. But when the blonde girl zoomed in on my Marine Corps tattoo and said, "Look, it's a walking antique from some old war nobody cares about," something inside me shifted. "That's enough," I said quietly, kneeling to gather the scattered food. "What's wrong, old man?" The ringleader, a kid who couldn't have been more than 17, stepped closer. "Gonna cry? Gonna tell our parents?" He gestured at the massive house behind him. "My dad owns half this town. Your pathetic delivery job exists because people like us let it." The other kids giggled, still recording. One of them, a younger boy who looked uncomfortable but was too cowardly to speak up, kept glancing at his friends like he wanted to say something but didn't have the spine. I finished picking up the pizza pieces, stood slowly despite my aching knees, and looked at each of their faces. Young, privileged, cruel in the casual way that only comes from never facing real consequences. "You know what I think?" the girl with the phone said, still filming. "I think we should post this everywhere. Local grandpa can't handle simple delivery. Job. Maybe if we make it viral enough, he'll finally retire." "Yeah," another kid chimed in. "Do everyone a favor and get off the road before you hurt someone, fossil." I nodded slowly, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. "Becky," I said when she answered. "Activate Protocol 7. The line went quiet for a moment. Then, "Dad, are you sure?" "I'm sure, sweetheart. Roger that." ETA 20 minutes. I hung up and looked at the kids who were still giggling and uploading their video. "You might want to call your parents," I told them calmly. "Let them know they'll be having visitors soon." The ringleader laughed. "What, you gonna sick your lawyer on us?" "Newsflash, Gramps, we have lawyers too. Good ones." I walked back to my beat-up Honda Civic, sat behind the wheel, and waited. 18 minutes later, 3 black SUVs with government plates pulled into the circular driveway of the Henderson family estate. The kids, who'd been lounging on their front steps continuing to mock me through my car window, suddenly went very quiet. The first person out of the lead vehicle was my daughter, Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Morrison, dressed in her dress blues with enough ribbons to outfit a parade. Behind her came 5 other officers, men and women I hadn't seen in decades, but whose faces were burned into my memory from the day we'd all nearly died together in Grenada. "Jesus Christ," whispered the blonde girl, her phone suddenly forgotten. Becky. Walked up to my car first, her bearing as rigid and professional as the day she'd graduated from West Point. "Master Sergeant Morrison," she said, using my old rank. "We came as soon as we got your call." "Thank you, Colonel. I appreciate the response time." She nodded curtly, then turned to face the teenagers, who were now pressed against their front door like they were trying to disappear into the wood. "You kids mind explaining why you thought it was appropriate to assault a decorated veteran?" Her voice carried the kind of authority that made grown men snap to attention. "We didn't assault anybody," the ringleader stammered, but his bravado was evaporating fast. It was just a joke. A joke." Colonel Morrison repeated the words like they tasted bad. "You filmed yourselves destroying this man's property, humiliating him while he was trying to earn money for his medication, and mocking his military service. That's your idea of humor?" Major David Chen, my old squad leader, stepped forward. "Son, do you know who this man is?" The kid shook his head mutely. "This is Master Sergeant Gerald Morrison, United States Marine Corps. In 1983, he single-handedly held off an enemy ambush in Grenada for 4 hours, allowing his platoon to evacuate 17 wounded Marines to safety. He earned the Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts, and the respect of every person who's ever worn the uniform. In 1991, added Captain Sarah Williams, he saved my life in the Gulf War when our convoy was hit by an IED, carried me to safety with a dislocated shoulder and a concussion. And in 2003, said Lieutenant Colonel James Parker, he came out of retirement to serve as a training instructor in Iraq, where he taught combat survival to over 300 soldiers. Some of those soldiers went on to save countless civilian lives because of what this man taught them. I watched the color drain from the teenagers' faces as the weight of their mistake became clear. The girl who'd been filming was now crying, quietly, her phone hanging limp in her hand. "But you know what's really impressive about Master Sergeant Morrison?" Becky continued. "After 30 years of service, after earning decorations most people only dream of, after literally saving dozens of lives in combat, he came home and spent another 20 years volunteering at the VA hospital, helping other veterans transition back to civilian life. And now," Major Chen said, his voice hard as granite, "he's 86 years old and delivering food to ungrateful little shits like you because his prescription medications cost more than his pension covers." The front door of the mansion opened, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out, presumably someone's father, drawn by the sound of military vehicles in his driveway. "What's going on here?" he demanded, then stopped short when he saw the assembled officers. "Mr. Henderson, I presume," Becky said. "Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, United States Army. We're here regarding an incident involving your son and this Marine veteran." Henderson's expression shifted as he took in the scene, his son cowering against the door, 6 military officers in dress uniform, and me sitting in my delivery car with pizza sauce still staining my uniform. "Tyler," Henderson said slowly, his voice deadly quiet. "What did you do?" The kid, Tyler, opened his mouth but no sound came out. Instead, the girl held up her phone with a shaking hand. We recorded it. We were going to post it online." Henderson watched the video, his face growing darker with each passing second. When it finished, he looked at his son with an expression of pure disgust. "You humiliated a war hero for social media content?" His voice was barely controlled rage. "You attacked an elderly man who was just trying to do his job?" "Dad, we didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't bother to ask. You didn't know because you've been raised to think the world exists for your entertainment." Henderson turned to me, his expression shifting to mortification. "Sir, I cannot begin to express how sorry I am. This is unacceptable behavior and there will be consequences." "Mr. Henderson," I said, getting out of my car slowly, "I appreciate the apology, but this isn't really about me." "What do you mean?" "Your son and his friends just learned something important today. They learned that actions have consequences, and that every person they encounter has a story they don't know." I looked at Tyler, who was still pressed against the door like he wanted to become part of the architecture. "The question is whether they'll remember this lesson." "They'll remember," Henderson said grimly. "I'll make sure of that." Other parents had begun arriving. Apparently word had spread quickly through the neighborhood that military officers were questioning their children. Each arrival brought fresh waves of shame and angry confrontations between parents and kids. But something else was happening too. The younger boy who'd looked uncomfortable during the original incident stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment, but his voice steady. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "I'm really sorry. I should have said something. I should have stopped them." I studied his face. Maybe 15, still young enough to learn from his mistakes. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus. Marcus Webb." "Well, Marcus, recognizing you made a mistake is the first step toward making better choices. That takes courage." Becky walked over to me, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "Dad, you okay? Really?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Thank you for coming." You know we'd come from anywhere if you called Protocol 7. She glanced at the assembled officers. We've been waiting years for an excuse to get the old team back together. Major Chen approached, a slight smile breaking through his stern expression. Master Sergeant, you realize you could have just called the cops, right? Or their parents directly. Where's the fun in that? I replied, earning chuckles from the other officers. Besides, added Captain Williams, these kids needed to understand that respect isn't optional, that there are still people in this world who've earned it the hard way. Lieutenant Colonel Parker nodded, and they needed to see that actions have consequences. Real consequences, not just getting their phones taken away for a week. As the parents sorted out punishments and apologies, I found myself talking with Marcus Webb, the kid who'd had the courage to step forward and apologize. He asked questions about my service, about the wars I'd fought in, about what it was like to be a Marine. Mr. Morrison, he said finally, why do you deliver food? I mean, if you're a war hero and everything, shouldn't the government take care of you? It was a fair question. One I'd asked myself plenty of times while filling out paperwork for prescription assistance programs that never seemed to provide enough help. The government does what it can, I said carefully, but there's a gap between what veterans need and what the system provides, so we do what we have to do. That's not right. No, son, it's not. But wallowing in what's not right doesn't pay. For insulin. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his phone. But instead of filming, he was typing rapidly. What are you doing? I asked. Starting a GoFundMe. For your medical expenses. He showed me the screen where he was writing a description of what had happened, but not the way his friends had intended to portray it. Instead, he was telling the story of an 86-year-old veteran who delivered food to pay for medication, and how a group of teenagers had learned a valuable lesson about respect. Marcus, you don't have to. Yes, I do. It's the right thing to do. Within an hour, his post had been shared dozens of times. Within a day, it would be shared thousands of times, raising more money than I'd make in a year of food delivery. But that wasn't the real victory. The real victory was watching Tyler Henderson, the ringleader who'd been so cruel, approach me hesitantly as his parents finished their heated conversation with Becky. Mr. Morrison? His voice was small, uncertain. I want to apologize. Really apologize. Not just because I got in trouble. Go ahead. I was wrong. What we did was horrible, and making fun of your military service was... He struggled for words. My grandfather was in Vietnam. He died before I was born, but my dad always talks about how proud he was of Grandpa's service. I should have known better. Yes, you should have. But you're young, and young people make mistakes. The question is, what you do next? Tyler nodded, tears starting to form in his eyes. I want to make it right. I don't know how, but I want to try. I looked at this kid, spoiled, privileged, but maybe not irredeemable, and made a decision. Tyler, if you really want to make it right, I have a suggestion. Anything. There's a VA hospital about 30 miles from here. Every week they have veterans who need someone to just sit and talk with them. Some of them haven't had visitors in years. If you're serious about making amends, volunteer there. Learn some stories. Listen to what real service looks like. Yes, sir. I'll do that. And Tyler, bring your friends, all of them. They could use the education too. As the military vehicles prepared to leave, Becky pulled me aside for a private conversation. Dad, I'm proud of you for handling this the way you did. You could have embarrassed those kids much worse. That wasn't the point, sweetheart. The point was education, not humiliation. Still, not everyone would have shown that kind of restraint. She paused, studying my face. Are you really okay doing food delivery? I've told you a dozen times, Linda and I can help with your expenses. I know you have, but I'm not ready to be taken care of yet. I'm still capable of working, and work gives me purpose, even when it means dealing with entitled brats. Especially then. Someone needs to teach them that respect isn't negotiable. 6 months later, I was still delivering food, though now with a much more robust bank account, thanks to Marcus Webb's fundraising efforts. But more importantly, I was also volunteering at the VA hospital twice a week, helping other veterans navigate the bureaucracy of benefits and medical care. Tyler Henderson and his friends had become regular volunteers there too, initially as court-ordered community service for their parents' punishment, but eventually because they'd discovered something valuable in listening to the stories of men and women who'd served their country. Marcus Webb had started a non-profit organization called Protocol 7, dedicated to supporting aging veterans who were struggling financially. The name had been my daughter's suggestion, honoring the code phrase that had brought military officers racing to my defense that day. The girl who'd filmed the original incident, Ashley Martinez, had become one of the organization's most effective fundraisers, using her social media skills to highlight veteran stories and raise awareness about the gaps in the support system. Even Tyler's father, David Henderson, had gotten involved, using his business connections to create job opportunities for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. It's funny how a moment of cruelty can become a catalyst for something better. I still think about that day sometimes when I'm making deliveries or sitting with veterans at the hospital. I think about how quickly those kids' laughter had turned to shame when they realized who they were mocking. I think about the power of consequence, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the way young people can surprise you with their capacity for growth. But mostly, I think about Protocol 7 itself, the emergency code my daughter and I had established years ago, back when she was first deployed and I was worried about her safety. It was supposed to be for life or death situations, times when she needed immediate backup without questions asked. I'd never expected to use it for teenage bullies and social media humiliation, but maybe that's exactly what it was for. Maybe standing up to cruelty, demanding respect for those who've earned it, and teaching young people about accountability. Maybe those are exactly the battles worth fighting. After all, every war veteran knows that the most important victories aren't always won on battlefields. Sometimes they're won in suburban driveways, with pizza sauce on your uniform and your daughter's voice on the phone saying, "Roger that, Dad, we're on our way." The kids thought they were humiliating a delivery driver. Instead, they got a masterclass in respect, consequence, and the kind of backup that comes from a lifetime of earning loyalty from people who understand what service really means. And, in the end, they learned that some protocols, like respect for those who've served, like standing up for what's right, like the bonds between people who've faced real adversity together, are never really deactivated. They're just waiting for the right moment to be called into action. Tyler texted me last week to let me know he'd enlisted in the Marine Corps and would be shipping out to boot camp in the fall. He said listening to veterans' stories at the hospital had inspired him to serve, and he wanted to earn the kind of respect he'd once mocked. "I want to be worthy of the uniform," he'd written. "I want to become the kind of man who deserves to wear it." I'd written back, "You already are, son. You just needed to find the courage to show it." Sometimes the best victories are the ones where everybody wins, where cruelty becomes compassion, where privilege becomes purpose, where a moment of shame becomes a lifetime of service. Protocol 7 had worked exactly as intended, not just as a call for backup, but as a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how old you get or how tired you become. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the fight itself becomes the teacher, and the lesson changes everyone involved. The kids learned about respect. I learned about forgiveness. And we all learned that it's never too late to become better than you were the day before. Not bad for a pizza delivery gone wrong in Highland Park, Texas. But then again, the best lessons often come from the most unexpected places, like a grandfather's phone call that brought 6 military officers racing to defend the honor of an 86-year-old Marine who just wanted to deliver food and afford his medication. That's the thing about Protocol 7. It's not really about the backup that comes when you call for help. It's about becoming the kind of person who's earned the right to make that call in the first place.